And kind of going through the versions of the bill, we're going to share some screenshots of the different versions. Now, they may not all be visually very clear, but we're going to try to go over as much as we can, and just trying to emphasize that if we look back at when this bill started in March of 2023 to where it's now, it's significantly changed, and what those changes actually are. So if we look at this version, this is from March. You can kind of just get an idea of, this is the initial bill. Well, let me take that back. It was not the initial bill. The initial bill was a spot bill, and the spot bill just mentioned ancestry. It was a couple of lines. This was the highly amended original version that actually mentioned caste for the first time. It's just that slight clarification. And so in this version, you can see, caste is everywhere, right? Caste is being added to different categories. We see that, caste is being basically added alongside other legal categories like race, religion, gender, etc. So you can see that here is this first version of the bill where caste is being suggested as a legal category, a separate standalone legal category. And this is, again, a continuation. Now, this is where we look at some definitions, and this is where we talk about the declarations and findings section, where it just talks about South Asians, makes a lot of claim. And in this version, remember, they actually even listed out the countries of South Asia. So even at that point, besides mentioning South Asia, they actually very specifically mention India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. They talked about oppressed versus oppressor. So there's a lot of things in there that were, much more egregious in that version. If we continue to go forward, this is now the April 17th version, I believe. Oh, sorry, we're still in March. So this, again, you can see that here there's a lot of problems with this. It continues to define castes in a certain way, continues to add castes to separate categories. So as you can see, basically the underlying point is that the language was very discriminatory in terms of how it describes South Asians, and within that specifically how they defined oppressor versus oppressed. There is a lot of addition of caste to every single civil rights statute and every government code. So it was everywhere, basically. That's the bottom line here. Now, if we continue to move along, we go to the next version, which is the April 17th version. So here's where we start to see some amendments, but this actual version was not much better. So this April 17th version was an attempt, I guess, by Wahab to show that she is trying to make changes, but the actual changes did not remove caste from the statute or from the actual separate legal category. It still included a lot of language around South Asians. Yes, it took out specific mentions of countries and made a couple of changes, taking out what Dalit means, but it was still just as bad version. So, not a lot of significant changes here. Now, if we fast forward from that to June 15th version, this is where we see a lot of differences. And Suhag, if you want to touch on some of these and then kind of take us from there up until the Judiciary Committee version that came out.
Sure. So on the June 15th, what we start seeing is removal of all the declarative language. So all of the references to South Asia, we had seen that caste exists in technology, as human trafficking, as rape, all of that stuff is removed from the findings and the declarations, but you still have caste as a standalone category. And all along we're hearing from, assembly members, as well as, people reporting back from their meetings that Senator Wahab was very resistant to any changes, and eventually was forced to accept some of even these changes because she was even resistant to removing some of the very blatantly racist language, even though she continues to insist that this was never about targeting any one group. If it wasn't, then why did she mention specific groups? Then we get to finally to the to the analysis. So let's talk a little bit about that, because what basically happened is that we had that June 15th version going into the Assembly Judiciary Committee meeting. And then a motion was made to amend. And the motion to amend was basically to adopt the recommendations of the analysis. Now, if you recall, I mentioned someone named Tom Clark. He was the committee consultant. And so this is all of his language in terms of analyzing. What the committee consultant is supposed to do is they're supposed to kind of collate all of the background information about a bill, the authors, maybe justification for the bill or any responses to questions. Then they're supposed to kind of outline the arguments of those who are supporting the bill, those who are opposing the bill, and then make kind of a recommendation at the end of it. Now, I want to say that the same process happened with the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, there were some key differences, I think, between the analysis that was conducted for the Senate versus the Assembly. One, the Senate committee consultant was younger. And when you read the analysis, even though we had hundreds of people writing in, maybe thousands actually, writing in letters about concerns about equal protection and due process, you actually don't find the mention of equal protection or due process even once in her analysis. She barely mentioned the concerns that those of us opposing the bill were raising about stigma and the association of caste with South Asians, and therefore it becoming a facially discriminatory category. And this was all with the very pointed language about South Asians, engaging in all sorts of, bad behavior or bad conduct. So, when you compare the two, you see a lot more legal analysis happening with the Assembly. Tom Clark is definitely older. He's well respected. But on the Senate side of things, the conclusions seem to be either from a lack of legal knowledge, or they seem to be politically driven. Now, in Tom Clark's analysis, in spite of the fact that caste still ended up remaining as part of the amendment, I think that's more a reflection not of his concerns that he clearly expresses throughout the analysis, but because of those political negotiations where Senator Wahab was just digging her heels in on that word. So you can see throughout the analysis, and I believe it's still available online. If not, we can make it available. But, the analysis shows that there's an understanding of the concerns about caste's close association with South Asians. There's also an understanding and also calling out the hypocrisy of both the supporters of the bill as well as the author to deny that caste is an aspect of ancestry, because that's why they were digging in that low. And he's saying, well, on the one hand, you're acknowledging that caste is already covered under the law, and that's on the face of the bill. And it probably was being raised in private communications. So if it is already covered by the law, where is it covered? If they're acknowledging that it's already covered at least partially under ancestry, why is there the insistence of the word caste? And so you kind of can see even in the analysis some of the discriminatory intent that's starting to come out, even more so, where before we might have said, hey, maybe these are unintended consequences, we just don't know. But I think that you see hints of that in the analysis. The second thing that I think is, going to that point about that resistance. Here you see, the analysis talking about how they're perplexed by the author's, resistance to ancestry for all the points that I raised. Now, there's many other important points here about intent that to us really solidify kind of our biggest fear, which was that this is discriminatory intent, or driven by a discriminatory intent or an intent to treat South Asians in a manner that's different from all other ethnicities. And so you see that kind of coming out in black and white in the analysis. Now, is it a perfect analysis? No. at least from our viewpoint. He did dismiss some of the equal protection arguments, even though he argues about many of the elements that are the foundation of the equal protection argument, which is that when you have a word that's so closely associated with one group, it is facially discriminatory. And then the second thing is that there's a lot of deference given to the Equality Lab survey, which we've talked about ad nauseum in terms of the problematic nature of this, the way in which that data was gathered, at not being representative of the South Asian community, nor it being generalizable. So let me just go to the next slide now. She, because of that line in the sand, that is why caste is still in the current bill as it passed out of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. However, as we said at the top of the hour, it has been significantly modified. It is today a different bill than it was back in March or April. Caste is no longer a standalone category and is now part of the clarification. It has a specific definition, even though it's not the plain meaning of the word, and for that reason, it could still be weaponized. In the first version of the bill, I think caste was mentioned something like 45 times, maybe even more. The word South Asian was mentioned at least 5 to 7 times. In the amended version that passed earlier this week, any reference to South Asian has been removed completely, and caste is mentioned, twice in 3 pieces of law that are being proposed to amend as a clarification of ancestry, as well as then the definition of what caste actually means, which they, in shorthand, they have sought for it to mean inherited social status. Now, the last thing I'll just say is that about the amended bill, there we go, is that when we look at what we proposed, which was that ancestry should be defined as, 7 different words: parentage, birth, descent, et cetera, we offered 7 substitute words, and 4 of those words now are part of this bill, with the exclusion of caste, which we made our best effort to argue that it really shouldn't be there. And we were almost there, but because of Senator Wahhab's kind of digging in, it just, we couldn't get that over the finish line. Now, is caste as it's defined, and that is an individual's perceived position in a system of social stratification on the basis of inherited status. Is the definition a bunch of word salad? Absolutely. Is it facially discriminatory? Probably not. But could the presence of caste still be weaponized? Yes, but then so can ancestry. And we've seen that happen in the Cisco case, where ancestry has been weaponized against the defendants who, for now, the case has been dismissed against with prejudice, Sundar Iyer and Ramana Kampela. So, and then last thing is that, does the presence of caste still enforce stigma or stereotypes? Yes. I go back to the plain meaning. If you look up caste, and we did for about 18 dictionaries and encyclopedias, including one in Spanish, you still find that caste is defined as something that's inherently Indian and specifically rooted in Hindu teachings. And then the California Code, the Education Code, still requires that caste be taught as something inherent to Indian Hinduism. So bottom line here is that getting a legislative bill drastically modified, as the community has, is no small feat. And we did this collectively together. But is it still problematic? Yes, and that's why we will talk about next steps.